COVID-19 has brought the global economy to its knees.
The pandemic has been an enormous, synchronized global economic shock on a scale which has not been seen since the Second World War.
Inflation hit a 40-year record high in March, with consumer prices rising 8.5%.
The ruins of Mariupol are symbolic of Russia's devastating bombardment.
I call it genocide because it's become clearer and clearer that Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of even being able to be a Ukrainian.
With the invasion of Ukraine is him being reckless in a way that you might not have anticipated.
Capitalism right now is going through a reckoning. There has to be a way in which profits and planet align. ESG, in theory, should help.
Whole business is built on the idea that you can invest in companies that will allow you to do well as an investor, but also can do some good for the world.
The Securities and Exchange Commission has come up with a regulatory agenda to bring in more regulation as far as ESG disclosures are concerned.
Somewhere between 2026 and 2030 is where we think that $1 million from $40,000. I don't think people believed me when I said it on stage last week at Bitcoin 2022.
You could see gas prices shoot up closer to $5 when we hit July 4th.
While governments have sought to intervene domestically, internationally there's also been an increase in protectionism when countries shield their industries against foreign competition. The crisis has caused panic about the fragility of global supply chains.
So there's going to be a tipping point, we all know it's coming, where people are going to have to pull back.
At the moment, interest rates are very low, and so despite the fact that you have this enormous debt that's been run up as a result of the pandemic, the costs of servicing it are not high. So there is no doubt that there's space for governments to support the economy.
I think if you had asked me a year ago, what would have happened if we had done in 2009 some $3 trillion stimulus, some massive influx of dollars into the economy, I would have assumed that would have all gone into higher growth, things like that. What we're seeing now, a lot of money gets spent. If that all goes into inflation rather than real growth, it's not good for people's sentiment about the economy, and it's not creating a better standard of living. It just flows into shortages, inflation, all the stuff we're dealing with right now.
Good afternoon. We hope you've enjoyed NobleCon18 so far. What we have for you on stage in a moment is sure not to disappoint. A reminder that our signature networking event, The After, is this evening. Meet right outside this ballroom at around 8:15, and be sure to wear your NobleCon shirt. Our moderator for this topical panel reaches 7 million listeners each week through his nationally syndicated radio program on Salem. He's also a Fox News contributor and guest host. Please welcome the guy with a better radio voice than mine, Mike Gallagher.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's a nice introduction. Makes me feel very important, makes me feel very responsible. Now that I'm up here, I might as well tell you how important I really am. Today on the flight, and I know these four distinguished gentlemen are going to have a lot of great insights. We got great stuff to get to, but I have to just tell you that's something that was way more important than any of these distinguished gentlemen. On the plane today, a very famous man walked down the aisle and sat right next to me. I was pretty excited, and I kind of geeked out because being a WWE fan, I took a picture which was as creepy as it sounds. I snuck a picture across the aisle. Now, I don't know if you can figure out who that is. Wrestling fans know, but then I figured that's too creepy, and so I decided to do the real thing, and I embarrassingly went up to him afterwards, and yes, that's Rick Nature Boy Flair. Pretty cool, huh? I mean, I was excited. So anything these guys say will not overwhelm me because I got to take a picture with Rick Nature Boy Flair. The guy next to me Googled him and found out that Rick Nature Boy Flair once had a very provocative plane ride a number of years ago. It involved a bathrobe and a flight attendant and nothing else. So fortunately, this American Airlines flight was very, very calm. It didn't come close to comparing to that. The world is hot right now is definitely the theme, and boy, is it ever. And this is an interesting mix because I'm an issues-oriented, breaking news, political, red meat talk show host. So I'm, ready to go with these guys about this being the epicenter today, about the world being hot. You probably heard the news that the Florida legislature is absolutely going to strip Disney of the exemption that they've received, Disney World, since the 1960s. If you know Disney World, they have a 60 square mile area that they run. They don't use county services, they don't use police, they don't use fire, they use everything they do. Well, remind yourself on the list of people you don't want to tick off. Don't tick off Governor Ron DeSantis, because he spearheaded an effort to strip Disney of that exemption, which is going to have an enormous financial implication, because now Disney doesn't get the hundreds of millions of dollars of benefits, tax included, that they have been getting since the late 60s when Walt Disney first identified that area outside Orlando. So it's going to be a really interesting economic development for Florida, and a tough battle, because nobody has ever challenged Disney like Governor DeSantis is. And of course it goes to the parental notification rights bill that is so controversial and such a hot topic. So the world is hot, to make no bones about it. This global economic picture is sort of a focus we're going to have today with, again, 4 very, very distinguished gentlemen who are going to try to help make sense of it all. So I want to introduce to you, first of all, with Ukraine all over the news and the heartbreak and the Putin onslaught, NATO has been front and center and has become a real talking point about, in a way that the world has never really recognized before. So we are very honored to have Brigadier General Blaine Holt, Deputy U.S. Military Representative to NATO. General, welcome to our conversation. Rani Selwanes is Noble's Head of Investment Banking. Rani, welcome as well. Good to see you. Chuck Rubin is the former chairman and CEO of Michaels. Chuck, welcome. And finally, Mark Chalmers is the CEO of Energy Fuels. Mark, welcome aboard. So, again, this interesting mix of a red meat guy with issues and this distinguished panel. I want to talk a lot about ESG and how it's impacting businesses, markets, investment, locally, globally. And I'm going to throw out some questions, gentlemen, and any of you can kind of dive in, but it probably would help to start with Chuck, because the CEOs are making decisions about ESG. There's this movement in America where corporate America is trying to play by the rules. And I think it's an interesting tie-in to social awareness, I should say, because Disney was stuck in the middle here, tried to sort of stay out of the culture wars. Employees were furious that they stayed out of it. They dove in, and now they're going to pay, it looks like, at least economically, a very heavy price. So, Chuck, why don't we start with you? What led to the ESG movement in the companies that you ran, and what strategies did you consider most important for your businesses to thrive in these uncharted waters?
Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the panelists, I'm sure we understand that we stand between this panel and drinks and dinner for you, so we'll try to be as efficient as we can. The ESG movement is a really interesting one. My view on it may be different than many others, and in my view tends to gravitate towards smaller and medium-sized companies, which I'm sure many of you represent. ESG, I think, is an important factor, but it is a means to an end. And unfortunately, I think in today's day and age where things have become so politicized and polarized in many ways, it for many companies, it seems like it has become the end as opposed to the means. So when I say it's a means to an end, I think it is part of any good strategy. And in a company that is a for-profit company, the strategy is to make money. But there are ways to do it, and I think over the past number of years, it continues to evolve, that companies are realizing that they can make money in ways that contribute back to society and contribute to their employees and their shareholders and their customers. In my experience, personal experience, I should add before I talk about my experience, ESG is also an incredibly broad area. There's almost nothing that can't fall under the ESG umbrella. So you can have social impact, you can have climate impact, you can have employee impact, you can have governance, diversity. So almost any topic can fall under the ESG banner. And unfortunately, in my opinion, I think some companies right now are just heralding the PR around their ESG efforts. My view is that the strategy of the company should be guiding how the company does business. But like most companies that, at least that I've been experienced with and that are consumer-based, if you focus on what's appropriate for the consumer and start building your business model around an offering or a product for that consumer, and then build efforts that fall under ESG that also fit with that same consumer, that's best served. So to give you some live examples, most recently I was the chairman and CEO of Michaels. Prior to that, I was the CEO of a company called Ulta Beauty, which many of you may be familiar with as well. Both companies have as their customer base primarily women. But in both instances, when I arrived at the company, both the board of directors and the leadership team itself was primarily men. And, set aside any social commentary that you want on that, it doesn't seem appropriate to have the senior management of a company that focuses on delivering a product and service to women, being run by men. So we set out very clearly at the beginning to balance that in a better way. Yes, that was good from an ESG perspective, but more importantly, it just made sense in developing the tactics that we needed to actually be successful and make those companies more profitable ultimately for our shareholders. Another example, again, back in a company at Michaels. Michaels is a $5 billion plus retailer, but the average item that Michaels sells for about $7 or $8 retail. So we sold a lot of units of product. Each of those products is packaged in some way. So we made another effort that we believed was good for our business and good for our customer and ultimately good for ESG. We focused on much less packaging where we could get away with it. And the packaging that we did do, we made a great effort to use recycled product. So again, my point in giving these two examples were our pursuit was not to look good from an ESG perspective. Our pursuit was to do what was right for our business, but we integrated the ESG initiatives under our strategy, and that, in my opinion, is what's critical as businesses look forward in trying to do something that's good for both their business and their company, as well as all the other ESG causes that are out there.
Rani, let's talk for a moment about the ESG investment factor. That's your area of expertise. Why do investors care so much about ESG to the point that it's literally driving their investment decisions?
Well, mainly because their boards and their investment committees are pushing them to do so. But you got to think about it in a much bigger picture. Whether it's regulatory to a certain extent in Europe, for example, or is it just social conscience and a push to do the right thing? They're under pressure, and we're seeing it in banks, in global banks, who today are being forced to pull out of certain industries or reduce their exposure to certain industries. One of the biggest industries that's being hurt is the hydrocarbon industry, especially at the large cap space, whether it's IOCs or NOCs. Then you have it on the capital providers, the investors, the asset managers, who are demanding an ESG angle from a lot of issuers. You're seeing it very strongly in the fixed income space because it's more tangible in the fixed income space, where in order to get their bids, in order to get their orders, in order to get big checks, they're asking to show you their ESG framework, and it goes beyond simply saying we're ESG. It goes beyond simply saying that, yeah, we're thinking about, an environmental program, a social program. You need to build a framework. It takes time. It needs to be developed with the UN SDG model. And it needs to be tangible. It needs to be provable. Now, the good news is investors are rewarding those issuers that do have ESG frameworks. On the fixed income side, if you're an issuer, you can shave your yield curve by about 25 basis points, so that's significant, especially when you know that that's your jumping off point in the future and you're looking to raise more capital on the fixed income side. So there is a reward there. We're seeing it start to creep in on the equity side, where questions are now coming from equity investors about your ESG. And as we continue going down this path, it's going to be more and more until we get government behind it and pushing it and for regulations. My message to any issuer today is, it behooves you to go out and start your ESG framework when you're being rewarded by investors. It's going to come a point where ESG becomes mainstream. And once it's mainstream, you've missed the boat. You know, you're not going to get rewarded because that's just the way the market has become.
So let me, not actually a gentle pushback, but let me introduce sort of my world to both of you. And Chuck, let me go back to you for a moment. I'm sure you anticipate that, for example, in the talk radio world, there's a word we use, and that's woke. There's a wokeness, and arguably Disney is going to pay a price. I would think this whole battle right now between Governor DeSantis and the Disney Corporation is under the mantle of ESG, where Disney felt a need to get involved in an important, complicated issue. From the sidelines, writers at the Wall Street Journal are opining that Disney should have stayed out of it. They should not have elevated this kind of discourse to set up a battle royale like this with Ron DeSantis. Chuck, is there a risk to following the ESG playbook? Is there a risk to investors? Is there a risk to the bottom line? I mean, you both have talked glowingly about the positives. What about the potential negative and that risk factor?
So I'll start on this. I bifurcated in the size of the company. So to answer your question, I do believe there is a woke aspect to ESG. The larger your company, the higher profile it is. And in today's world, there's no decision that can be delivered without somebody taking exception. I could cure cancer tomorrow, and the question would be, well, why didn't you do it sooner? But on a small to medium-sized company basis, which again, I'm assuming most companies represented in this room would fall into that category, I think ESG is a good thing, but again, as a means to an end. It is not, as I said a moment ago, I don't define it as purely the end, although some large companies are putting out their sustainability reports and they're using social media to talk about their ESG efforts. It seems as though the headline, though, is buried, which is the financial performance of the company. And when I say that I think that ESG is a good thing, it is good when it is intimately or integrally involved in the strategy of the company and how the strategy is then executed. That can tap into things that are doing good for social causes, for climate, for governance, for employee benefits. It's the bigger companies that are the high profile that are getting, in my opinion, out beyond their ski tips a little bit.
You know, Ronnie, we can talk about the polarized nature of our culture, and the country is probably as polarized today as it's ever been, certainly than I can ever remember. Even today, first time on an airport and first time on a plane without a mask. And it was wild because I felt naughty. I kept looking around. And I made a point on the air this morning. I said, you know what I'm going to do? And I'm anti-mandate, but I forget the politics of it. But we're so divided on everything, the science and the vaccines and the mandates and the lockdowns. And I said on air this morning, listen, if I sit next to, for the first time on this maskless flight, next to a little old lady who's scared and she looks terrified, she's got 3 masks on, and she looks over at me, I'm going to say to her, would it make you more comfortable if I put my mask on? Well, and I'd put it on if she asked me to. Fortunately, I sat next to a businessman today, a criminal defense lawyer out of Pittsburgh. He didn't care. He actually was a listener to the show. We both laughed and joked and didn't have our masks on. But the point is, when I said I wanted to be courteous to the person next to me, the ceiling caved in on me from my callers from all over the country. Oh, you're woke, Gallagher. You're such a baby. You're giving in to them. What are you doing this for? And I thought even that's controversial, and even being polite is volatile. So Ronnie, with that in mind, let's apply it to ESG. There've got to be investors who do have that heightened sensitivity to, again, as Chuck said, being woke. And woke is not a nice thing at least in our world, but to the left and many people, it is important. It's doing the right thing, and it's following an agenda that matters. Are there investors who have a heightened sensitivity to the whole ESG playbook and are reluctant to be engaged because they don't want to do business with a company that might get itself in trouble? Again, I hate to keep banging this drum, but not unlike Disney got into today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a small pocket of investors, and that's where you see the social finance funds that are I don't know what percentage of the investors it is, but most of these funds are little. Those are the ones that really believe, and they're set up. And you can tell by the structure, and when you speak to these investors, they're actually unpeeling the onion, and they want to make sure that your ideals pretty much align with their investment criteria. But, I don't think that's the issue. Those aren't the ones that are going to move the market.
Right.
Moving the market comes from these mega multi-billion, 100 billion investors, right? And they're simply doing it because it's a mandate. And if it's a mandate, it becomes the rule of thumb for the market. If you have a PIMCO, that's a pretty huge fund, and it's a fixed income investor, and they're telling you we need to see an ESG angle. Well, if you're an issuer and you want to issue $2 or $3 billion at one time, you're going to make sure you have an ESG angle. And there you go. The market starts to develop, and it starts to, it becomes a domino effect. So that's the reality. It's not the small players. And I hate to be, a Debbie Downer, but it's the truth in reality. It's not the small guys that are going to get ESG on the map. They have a social belief, and they believe it, and they sit in these small towns and they start a fund. They have some in Seattle. But the reality is it's the PIMCOs, it's the BlackRocks, it's the Wellingtons, and it's these size funds that are going to drive the ESG agenda.
Chuck, let me ask you the same thing. I mean, is there a sensitivity? Is there a downside to this?
Well, I don't know if there's a downside. Just to come back, I would challenge a little bit. One, if you're looking at true ESG types of improvements in the world, then it's not just the large companies that have to implement this. It's all companies. There's far more smaller companies than there are large companies. Everyone's got to take their part and apply it to their business to really make some kind of movement in the world. As far as investors, I'm a bit biased on this, but I have lived through, in my retail background, I have lived through times when investors believed that e-commerce companies were the only way to go, pure play e-commerce companies, and that anybody with brick and mortar was a dinosaur and everything was e-commerce only. Well, that phase kind of passed over and then moved into a phase where direct-to-consumer, if you were direct-to-consumer, that was the only way to sell, and right now what's happening is that many direct-to-consumer companies are struggling. So my point is that investors, I think, big investment firms as well, can have a little bit of the initiative du jour. And while ESG may have a longer life to it, and fundamentally I believe has a critical role in what business does today, my sense is that it has a flavor of a topic du jour that investors will balance over time.
Let's pivot a little bit and talk Ukraine. It's such a huge story that we've never really experienced since World War II. Americans, these are unprecedented times. And in fact, as we see the slaughter and the heartache and the anguish of the Ukrainian people, Americans want to help. In fact, I'm blessed to work for a company that has a heart and wants to help where we can. And we partnered since March with Food for the Poor, a ministry that's not too far from here, and the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And since March the 1st, the Mike Gallagher Show has collected over $300,000 from our audience to help Ukrainians get out of Ukraine. That's how engaged people are to try to help. General, you have a very unique perspective on all of this and an important one. Let's talk a little bit about the role that China plays in the potential Armageddon-like scenario where Russia does not seem to be easing up at all, but Ukraine has fought back. Can you give us from 35,000 feet your perspective of what we've seen thus far and what it's going to take to stop Vladimir Putin? There was a Democrat legislator, Chris Coons, who said over the weekend, Putin's only going to stop when we stop him. And boy, you say that and you open up the door to a military engagement the likes of which the United States has never seen. We could be talking about a nuclear conflict. General, give us your sort of overview of what you've witnessed over the last few weeks and how it plays into your experience and your career.
Thank you very much for that, and it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. In my experience, and just to kind of set the framework, I was running logistics for the European theater for the Defense Department when Crimea fell. So I'm pretty intimately familiar with some of the inner workings about how far back this goes. What I will tell you is that from that night when the little green men went into Crimea and we did not, by some fashion or form, help Ukraine expel them, a war started then. So Ukraine has been at war for 8 years. They've been doing that under the watchful eye of the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, but there has been a back and forth on the Donbass for the longest time. This has been part of Putin's strategy. To get you into the head of Vladimir Putin really quickly, the KGB Cold Warrior, this is a man who's got, by no accident, a portrait of Peter the Great on his wall, because he sees himself in this role of empire conquest and restoration of Russian greatness from historical connotations. That's where he comes at this from. And he has viewed the West with great derision and NATO with great animus about something that he feels was wronged when the CCCP fell. That's how we get here. This has been calculated. People will say, well, Putin's crazy. No, hold on. In 2018, a big moment happened financially that just went right past us. Wasn't reported on, not widely anyway, and that was he sold all the U.S. treasuries in the Russian bank account, and we should have immediately said, something's up. But, and here's an indictment on the Defense Department, we don't teach officers economics and history, and that is something that ought to be in your kit bag, because that was the first shot off the bow here. And then he went and bought 2,100 metric tons of gold. Well, what are you going to do with all that gold? So the table is set. He has been on course. He was interrupted by the last administration, in my view, in my opinion, but he certainly has gone closer to China as we get to this place. That's his economic war that he set the stage and set a trap, knowing full well that sanctions were going to be the order of the day today. We could talk about the atrocities and the war crimes and the annihilation of Ukraine because that's what he wants, but let's talk about that for just one quick second. This comes from frustration. He was lied to by his military for decades that they were modernizing, that they had this wonderful military, they spent billions on it, and now we're ready to go toe-to-toe with the U.S. or anybody. Well, that's not true. I was worried and reporting on Newsmax weeks before the thing took off and said, careful, if that Russian army gets embarrassed, this is going to be really ugly, really bad. And this is where we're at. They're stalling and they're resorting to weapons that are unconscionable and could get to the weapon that we fear the most. That's not off the table here. And here comes May 9th, Victory Day for them. But China plays into this because they say we're neutral. They're not neutral at all. They're actually helping in Europe fortify Serbia and other elements, and they're fortifying this financial game where Putin now broke sanctions by saying if you want to buy oil or food, which I believe is the #1 crisis in this world, you're going to have to buy it with rubles. You want rubles, you have to break your sanctions and come to a Russian bank. My currency's already fixed, by the way, because I backed it in gold on March 29th, and I was thinking about this. So it's a very complex environment, and it cuts through the Middle East, and it cuts through China, and it's global, and we should use our peripheral vision to look out and say, yes, we should be outraged about Ukraine. Yes, this is a genocide. But this is not the end of this if we don't stop him right here, my view.
Mark, let's talk a little bit about oil and gas and the effects of a prolonged conflict on commodity prices, namely oil, gas, industrial metals, and agricultural commodities. What will that effect be in the inevitable prolonged conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, one of the things that I always say is that the world has gotten addicted to cheap. Okay, so both in the United States and around the world, we've decided that we're comfortable with oil and gas from Russia. We're comfortable with securing a lot of our uranium and nuclear products from Russia, which should shock people. We're comfortable with the United States is dependent on 20% of its nuclear products for nuclear power from Russia. And that's not being sanctioned. And at the same time, when we had the opportunities here in the United States to be more energy independent, and we said, we thumbed our nose at it, and people said, well, we don't need that, right? I mean, it was what, a few months ago, you know, I hate to get into politics here, but we need to have our basic capacities. And the problem with these things like oil and gas and the energy, uranium, nuclear, enrichment, all those things, is that when they go away, and they have, a lot of that has gone away in the United States of America because it was no longer a priority. But it was a priority in Russia. And they knew they could inflict this kind of pain by having the infrastructure to do what they're doing right now. So, you know, it's, we're in a pickle. We're in a pickle, and you can't fix it quickly, because infrastructure takes years to build. Nowadays, when you need to permit things, you need to get access to public lands, you just can't go over there and start drilling holes for oil and gas. You can't start enriching uranium because we have no enrichment in the country. And so, you know, and that kind of shifts over to places like Kazakhstan and China, because those countries make certain commodities like energy national priorities. And it used to be here, but it no longer is, and now you see people scrambling. Right now, I was in a meeting, well, a couple weeks ago, and with some major nuclear utilities, and they said if you turn the faucet off on nuclear products, reactors are going to start shutting down in the next couple years, which we don't want to have them shut down, but do we still have to get material from Russia? And we do, or they're going to shut down. So is that where we want to be? And I'll leave it at that.
Well, and I don't want to drag you into the political battles that I fight on the radio, but I must ask you, presidential candidate Biden made a promise that there would be no drilling on federal land. President Biden is now, of course, completely going 180 degrees and having to drill on federal land.
Look, at what's interesting to me is lip service. Oh, we want to be energy independent, but you can't drill. Oh, we have all these critical elements that we have to onshore again, but you can't build it, you can't permit it, you can't drill, you can't mine, you can't do all these things. So it's saying we need all this stuff, but you can't do any of it. That's what's happening right now.
And it's happened continually. I mean, it's one thing to promise or say something, another thing to deliver. And right now, people are having a hard time figuring out how they're going to fill up the gas tank, how they're going to pay rent, how they're going to certainly get their kids through college. Let's talk about inflation and this, all of you, if you don't mind, we'll kind of go down the line. In your best estimation, do you think the Fed will honor its promise and bring inflation under control? Will it continue to be decisive and level set monetary policy, as some think the Fed's hawkish stance could sink the economy into recession? Peer into your crystal ball, gentlemen, and tell us what you think the Fed's role is going to be, and are we going to see much worse pain before it gets any better? And you can all take a shot at it.
Let me just take this from a national security standpoint.
Good.
The higher inflation goes, the more our national security is imperiled. And until the Fed until our government and our people understand that we are not going to be printing our way to a stabilized economy anytime soon, we're going to have to make some very responsible choices very quickly. The Fed has not proven in the last year and a half with multi-trillion-dollar spending packages that in any way, shape, or form it's prepared for our future. And the politics of this rolling around with nonsensical things that Americans just don't believe, such as, oh, it's the Putin inflation, oh, it's the whatever inflation, but it didn't come from us wanting to shut down our economy, lock down individuals for this pandemic that we have done. And what I worry about is a national security professional is the effect on American liberty. I worry about the effect on our young people's ability to have jobs, to create businesses, because we're watching wealth being just absolutely obliterated. And it's not good for our country, it's not good for our Constitution, or therefore world stability.
Rami?
To answer your question, the long and short of it is, I think that the Fed misread inflation. They thought it was transient when it wasn't. They made a wrong assumption that the supply chain would clear up. And they put really strong morphine into the American economy. The balance sheet swelled more than double, went from 4 trillion to 9 trillion. The consumer stimulus that went in, unfortunately, was too much money for too few goods in the market to be purchased. And we see the disaster that became. I think that the Fed has finally found religion and decided to be a little bit honest in the last meeting, just playing off, General Holt's view. But I think they're still hedging. The right thing to do would have been to increase the rates by 50 bips, maybe even more, because the market already priced it in. They take this very cautious approach, and I don't understand why. Now you find yourself coming up to a next meeting, and I think the litmus test is, well, how much are they going to raise it in the next meeting? Everyone's saying, yeah, it's a done deal. They got to raise another 50 basis points. The Fed, they speak from both ends of their mouth. After the meeting, they realized that they should have been stronger, and they said that we're committed, we're going to do the right thing, but we're going to keep our eye out on the jobs report and see what happens. But I think it's beyond that. There's just too much money in the system. Too much money in the system. With the interest rates being as low as they are, that's like pouring gasoline on fire. It's just giving people unbelievable spending power. And when you have too few goods, people have no problem bidding things up. So I would hope that the Fed, by the summer, raises rates. Our curve has already assumed that we'll reach 2.25. That's Fed target. But you got to remember that even when we reach 2.25, we are still at incredibly low rates. And we've been in this morphine, alternative universe since 2004, if all of you remember. So you're talking about 18 years of these abnormal low interest rate environments. We've built up, we've gone through 2, maybe 3 market bull runs, but we don't learn. So they don't have a choice, because you're right, it's going to get ugly.
Chuck, let's talk retail for just a moment. Nobody knows the retail space like you do. I am confounded by contradictory messaging we get. The unemployment rate we're doing well with joblessness. People are doing great across the board, and yet good luck going into a retail store and getting someone to help you. Michael's is the exception to that, though. I wouldn't say that about Michael's. But everywhere, oh, I know, you don't run it, but you're loyal, I'm sure, and a good soldier. But no, it's true, you can't, good luck calling the airline, 4-hour wait time. Good luck calling American Express, 6-hour wait time some days. Let's face it, companies don't have people. And I talk to entrepreneurs all the time who are telling me day in and day out, there aren't people, I can't find people, I can't hire people. What's really going on? First of all, why aren't people going back to work? Number one. And number two, why do we see such a rosy picture painted on joblessness and unemployment when anecdotally it seems like a catastrophe out there?
That's a big question. Joblessness, it's a rosy picture because, essentially you're at full employment. Tying your last question and this question together, I'm not sure how we end with a soft landing here. Back to the supply chain issues, with China shut down again because of the recent outbreak of COVID, that's only going to exacerbate the supply chain problems that are there. With the cost of basic living going up, my son's apartment is going up 25%, his rent, up 25% year over year. And he can't afford to buy a house either. He's 21 years old. So the costs of an average person and how they live is becoming too much of a burden. So it becomes a very difficult situation. Now contrast that to the employment situation. What's this dichotomy? How can unemployment is low and you can't find enough people and how does this all work out? Quite honestly, I don't understand it myself.
I don't get it.
Now, you know, the opinions have read how COVID has unleashed people to work in different places. They're no longer tied to the locale that they live in. It gives them more flexibility. People don't want to work for entry-level labor, retail, or you know, fast food kinds of places and restaurants, and that's where we experience a lot of the shortage of labor. But at some point, as costs continue to go up, and wages, by the way, have continued to go up as well, how does this end in a good way? I don't see that happening. I see this being an explosion, and what's happening to labor right now. I joked before, I don't run Michael's, so you don't have to say nice things about them anymore. But running a retail company at Michael's, we had 55,000 people that work there. Staffing a retail company or any business for that matter, but especially a retail skilled labor, it becomes an enormously difficult task. Again, that's just driving up the cost of labor, which impacts the performance of the company, and it continues to this inflationary effect.
It's so peculiar, and Mark, I know you want to chime in, but it's this, there's no way to take the COVID equation out of it. 2 years of people largely working from home, staying home. It's not just retail. Banks, bank branches, Wells Fargo's closing all over where I live in the Tampa Bay area. And you ask, and they put up a sign, staff shortages. You see those signs everywhere, and you wonder, well, I just saw on the news last night that unemployment is doing great, record lows. So listen, if you don't get it, I sure don't get it. But Mark, chime in.
Yeah, I look at it from a slightly different perspective in the resource sector and the mining and energy sector. And it's not just shortage of people, it's shortage of the materials you need to do your job. I mean, reagents, equipment, chips. There's all these things that, if you have to have all of them lined up to get the job done. And if you're missing one or you're missing two, you're dead. And I'm finding that, like in our case, we're starting to buy things that we don't need just because we think we might need it in 6 months because we don't know if we'll get it in 6 months. So, you've got the cost of labor, the availability of skills, you've got these different things that you're going to need, and so that's all contributing to higher costs because you're actually I bought 3 loaders the other day, and I bought them, and I said I don't need them for a year, but am I going to get a loader for the mining business a year from now with the supply shortage? They may not have tires. We may not have fuel. We may not have the circuit boards. Buy them. That is a cost. So that contributes to this inflation. That contributes to the fact that the primary industries are going to be costing more to do business. And as long as we are dependent on these outside countries, it's a train wreck.
Let me stay with you for a moment and talk energy. OPEC recently has affirmed its intention to bring more production online to stabilize prices. What does that mean for producers and end users? Will oil prices stabilize in the medium term and lead to continued economic growth given the battle to curb this skyrocketing inflation?
Again, I think we're on the back foot here. And OPEC will respond and capitalize on that. We've got this void of Russia products. You've got the issues that I said earlier with energy production in the United States, access to public lands, all this stuff. I don't know where it settles out, but even things like draining the national reserve, the oil reserve, you got to fill it up after you drain it. Okay, so you got to overproduce in the future to catch up. So it's like digging a hole that you don't have a ladder to crawl back out of, in my opinion.
We're facing tons of challenges globally, of course, domestically. It's a little bit like Mrs. Lincoln. Other than that noise, how was the play? So I want to ask you, starting with you, General Holt, and let's go down and let's close. So take your time with this, and it's been a very enlightening discussion. I want to talk about 2022 and beyond. Give me your outlook individually from your individual areas of expertise. Tell me what you think 2022 looks like, what post-2022 looks like, because we've heard a lot today about the challenges and a lot of the obstacles we face Is there reason for optimism? Are you cautiously optimistic? Let's start with General Holt and go down the line here and talk. Give me a little bit of an outlook of what you see coming.
So I want to be cheery.
Because I'm depressed. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
I met the wrestler today, Ric Flair. Are you kidding? I'm still depressed.
This panel will be called the Buzzkill panel, so you're going to need an extra glass of wine. 2022 is fraught with great peril in my view, and I'm sorry, but it is. We have, how many times in recent memory can you remember people throwing around the term World War III or nuclear weapons? Not since the Cold War, to my memory. There's a reason for that. We are at the risk of great power, great global conflict right now. And we're seeing this play out. And if we can't make reasonable policy choices, strong, very tough, courageous policy choices, we may find ourselves falling further down that. Going forward, that will probably tie us up for quite a while on the international stage, trying to set these things into a better place. I worry greatly about what's going on in the Middle East, and I worry greatly that we're not paying enough attention to it, quite frankly. This Iran nuclear deal, in my opinion, has great peril attached to it, and arming the Iranians with billions of dollars does not erase them getting a nuclear weapon. Israel certainly has a preemption strategy. They have to, a preemption doctrine, and we should be very concerned about how we see things coming together there. The next piece that I am very concerned about is all of these events are not even really masking this problem very well anymore, and that is the global food supply chain. Ukraine and Russia make up 30% of the world's grains. We know that Ukraine is not going to be producing this year. A country like Egypt is 100% dependent on Ukrainian grain. It has asked for an IMF bailout for very good reason, so have 17 other countries so far. Food is going to become a rather big issue. I believe it's going to be an issue here as well over the next year and a half, 2 years. We're going to have to grow more. Fertilizer is going to be a very important thing, and we're all going to understand and know a lot more about fertilizer. The global supply chains. I have a supply chain software SaaS company. I can tell you from talking to Fortune 500 potential customers, they're very concerned about the reliability of these supply chains going away. And I think we're going to be seeing a deglobalization now. We're going to be seeing onshoring. We're going to be seeing, I can't take the risk of being in country X, country Y. This is not an anti-China thing. It's merely about risk. And these are the factors, and especially when I put famine, potential famine at the very top, that break down civil society. So we've already heard about the inflation as the backdrop that leads us to this place. These are the things that actually send the world to war if you look historically. And so my hope, and I'll stop with this, is my favorite Winston Churchill quote is, you can always trust the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. My hope is that we're getting to the end of that list, and right now couldn't be a more important time for our nation, its Constitution, our people to stand up and lead in this world and to find ways to stop this reality from coming. And we all have to work together at that, down to the grassroots level.
Thank you, General. Thanks for your service. Chuck Rubin, how do you see 2022 and beyond?
Well, that's tough to follow from the General. Fundamentally, I'm a byproduct of the American dream. I grew up in a part of Boston, which was an okay part of Boston. My dad owned a liquor store, and I was blessed. I had a good family, but we had no money. And I worked hard and had good luck and have achieved a certain level of success. So I believe fundamentally that America is a great country and that opportunity is here. The General and I were talking before. He's a pilot. I see our future as one of those flights that we probably all have been on, that partway through you're grabbing for that little vomit bag in the seat in front of you, because I think that certainly while I hope and pray that the world will land safely, the next foreseeable future, from inflation to labor shortages to the general discourse that is so prevalent in today's day and age, is very frightening, in addition to the things the General was talking about. I can only hope and pray, and I fundamentally believe that discussions at this conference today, discussions like this, where discourse can take place, will be the guiding force. To me, in addition to what the General said in terms of concerns, I would place the polarization of opinion, certainly true in America, but beyond America, as the greatest threat that we have. When we can't agree on facts, that is fundamentally a real problem. And until we do so, and then be able to have constructive discussions about what to do about those facts with the inherent disagreements, I think this is one of those really, really turbulent times.
Truth is not subjective, right? That's right. You know, it's not subjective. Thank you, Chuck, and thanks for your insights. Rani, how do you see the crystal ball?
I'll give you my opinion. I don't know if it's a crystal ball, but look, I think we've all debated how 2022 how we've arrived to where we've arrived. It is a difficult period. I think we're going to continue to have a difficult period in the near term. There is clear market dislocation, whether it's in geopolitics or economy. However, you know, this is probably a really good opportunity for, and I'll be a little bit positive here, for companies to begin looking inward. You have an opportunity to clean up, fix your businesses, fix your balance sheets, think about what your strategy is moving forward, but more importantly is to start thinking about how you're going to attract capital. Now, one thing that's lost in all of these market events that put us in this negative space is something called flight to safety. And I don't know if a lot of you follow capital flows. And what happens to the U.S. economy in particular when we find ourselves in these kind of situations? There is immediate flight to safety to the U.S. when you're out in Eastern markets in particular, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's the Far East. And this economy is the biggest recipient of capital. So if you're in a small cap and mid cap space and you're being challenged by your current investor base that you're going out to, now is a great time to begin preparing. Find where these capital providers are coming from, because you're capital seekers. Educate them on your space, because they're looking for you, but they don't know about you and they can't find you. So in market dislocations, there's always capital looking to be deployed. You just got to know where to find it. If you have advisors like Noble that know where to find this capital, these are people you should be speaking to. So this is my message for 2022 going to 2023. It's a big globe.
It is.
You know, use it to your benefit.
Thank you, Rani, and thank you. And Mark?
Yeah, I agree with the General's comments that we need to really focus on deglobalizing. You know, for the last 2 or 3 decades, it's been global economy, and we got to, you know, diversify and get products from whoever will provide them, and don't get addicted to cheap. You know, a lot of times going to these countries, it's people do it for a few percent or a cent or two per, you know, just almost nothing, just to go cheap. We need to deglobalize. We need to focus on the critical materials, minerals, oil and gas products that we need in the United States of America, and the you know, the Western world needs, and our allies. Work together with our allies, and do not forget, the problem with the average consumer and the American people and people around the world is if the conflict goes away, people will forget real quickly, and they'll say, I'm going to buy that product now because everything's all right now. Well, maybe it is for that day or that week, but it will. We should not forget what's happened this last 3 months.
It's a real honor to be able to spend time with you. All of us at the Salem Media Group are big fans of Noble Capital Markets. We're represented from our corporate office in California by Evan Mazur, our CFO, who snagged a front row seat. If you want to check out A Big Mouth on the Radio, MikeOnline.com is my radio show you can find out about. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the conference. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.